Years ago, there was a guy in Calgary. He was running a scam, and this guy had a personal connection inside of a bank. So he was able to access people's information. And he was able to trick a lot of people and scam a lot of people out of their money. And he managed to steal about $8 million that way. And so suddenly this guy found himself super wealthy. And of course, when a super wealthy criminal has money, he buys stuff. So he found himself buying all kinds of stuff. But soon after that, the police started investigating him. And the guy decided that instead of letting the police just come and arrest him, he would get out of the country. So he fled to Hong Kong, just picked up and just booked it as fast as he could, just left all of his stuff behind, didn't get rid of it at all. And so the police, they decided to seize all of his possessions, and with these possessions, they just decided to sell it at an auction. So the police, they made an announcement that they were going to do an auction. They made it a public auction, and the date was set. Well, a couple of our family friends, they heard about this auction, and they decided to go. So this is this middle-aged couple, a husband and wife, and they had a plan. The wife said to the husband before they went, "Okay, we are going there to see what this guy has. That's it. Not going to buy anything. We're just going there purely for our entertainment." Just like a date, I suppose. I've had worse. So off they went. And they joined this crowd at the auction, and if you could see them at the auction crowd, you can see them holding hands, and which might seem a bit romantic, but actually it was not really romantic at all, because the wife was actually holding her husband's hand so that he couldn't raise his arm and bid on anything. So that was how it was going. She knew how impulsive he was. And finally, the auctioneer got to the guy's luxury cars he had left behind. And the auctioneer named a price, and the wife made sure to hold her husband's hand, make sure he didn't raise it and bid on anything. And so his hand was stuck to his side. And so he raised his other hand. And that's how they got themselves a new car. I tell this story because it's a story about priorities. It's all the characters in the story had different priorities. The scam artist prioritized money over honesty. The wife prioritized saving money over getting new stuff, and the husband prioritized the new car over doing what his wife wanted. And that's normal. Everybody has different priorities. And our priorities shape our commitments and our decisions. Which leads me to my big question today. My question is, how can we have healthy priorities? I think this is a really important question because, as I've observed, good priorities help us to be the best version of ourselves. And so people who set priorities well can be more successful, they can have less problems, they'll have better relationships. So this is an important question. How can we set healthy priorities? And to find our answer, we always turn to the Bible. So let's read now from Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 to 24. So this is Jesus' criticism of the religious leaders around him. Jesus says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel." 2 verses of the Bible. There is so much to unpack here. And so I'll spend today just unpacking these 2 verses, and I think we'll find at the end that there's just one big idea. The big idea is that we need to start with the big things and move on to the small things. That is how we set priorities, and Jesus applied this idea directly to our relationship with God. But as it turns out, as Christians, our relationship with God encompasses all of life. And so it starts with our relationship with God, and this pattern extends to everything we do in life. This is about setting priorities in all of life. That said, my first point is that we start with big things. Back when I was in high school, I had a friend. I'll call him Abraham. And Abraham was about 18 years old, and he wanted to get his driver's license. Now, Abraham lived in Vancouver, and so the natural place to get his license was in Vancouver. But he had heard that in the next city over, in Richmond, the test was just so much easier, and Richmond is only about 20 minutes drive away. So he went to Richmond, he went to the testing center, and he got into a car with an examiner. So off they drove, and the test was going just fine. The examiner was just telling him to turn here and turn there, park here, you name it. And everything was going great until the examiner told him to take a right turn one time. And so he tried to take a right turn, except he turned it way too hard, and he basically crashed right into the curb. So he drove his car straight into the curb. And he hit it so hard that his car jumped onto the curb, and the force of the impact shot the examiner straight up to the roof. He bumped his head on the roof. The guy was actually bleeding a little bit when he came down. They were all okay, kind of. But the examiner, he wrote down, this incident, because you have to. So the examiner got out his pen and paper, wrote stuff down, and then they just kept on driving for some reason. Usually that's an instant fail, but they just kept on driving. And when my friend Abraham, he got his results back, he saw what the examiner wrote. He said, minor demerit. In other words, minor mistake. That was a minor mistake. The guy was bleeding. It was a minor mistake. And so my friend, he felt pretty lucky that day. He got his license. He felt like he dodged a bullet. But his luck ran out a few months later when he got into a car accident and he totaled his car. Because actually Abraham wasn't ready to drive. And part of the reason he got into that accident is because this examiner actually passed him when he should have failed. Because this examiner couldn't tell the difference between a major mistake and a minor mistake. And that's the kind of mistake that Jesus is criticizing the religious leaders for in our passage. They couldn't tell the difference between a big mistake and a small mistake, and it was causing massive problems as a result. Let's read again what Jesus said, starting in verse 23. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." So these words are worth unpacking. So Jesus starts off talking about these laws that God had given to the Jewish people. And one of these laws was the law of the tithe. The law was that if a Jewish people grew a crop, had farmland, grew a crop, they were supposed to give a tenth of that crop to the priest. And the reason why they had to give that money, or that crop away, was because the priest didn't have any farmland, and so this law was built so that the priests could feed their families. So it's a very practical law. And the Pharisees, they took this law so seriously. They were really careful to obey this law. And even if they had a little potted plant that gave them a little bit of dill or a little bit of meat, they would donate a tenth of the produce to the priests. They were very proud of themselves. They're very proud of themselves for following God's law down to the very last detail. But the problem was that the Pharisees had forgotten about the more important things in God's law. Because as it turns out, not all laws are equal. There are actually more important things in God's law than some other things. And the more important matters of the law are justice and mercy and faithfulness. It's worth understanding what these words mean, because they apply to us as well. These remain really important, I would argue, the most important things that God wants us to take care of. Justice means fairness. And the most important part of fairness is to protect the rights of people who are vulnerable. So justice means standing up for the little guy. It means helping people who are oppressed and disadvantaged and exploited so they can have a fair chance at life. I have a friend, from Vancouver. He started attending a mega church. He noticed that after a church service, the young adults over there would stand around in a circle, a really tight circle. He'd just be on the outside looking in, and nobody would welcome him in. And this wasn't just an accident, but this would happen week after week. They just had no space for him. And that was wrong, because they weren't giving him the chance that he deserved. Like, to God, this is an important person, and this crowd was ignoring the heart of God himself, because to God, the outsider deserves a chance to belong. So that's justice. He didn't need pity, friends. It's not really compassion. It's getting a chance to belong and getting the chance that he deserves. The second big priority in our passage is mercy. And mercy means compassion and kindness, having the heart to help people who are in need. So nowadays, some of our church members are knitting things like blankets and other things, and they're knitting them for children who come from troubled backgrounds. And they'll be passing on these items to a charity. And the idea behind these blankets is that these children will have a lot of dark and troublesome days, disappointing moments, but at least when they use their knitted things, they'll know that somebody was thinking of them, that they matter to somebody. And that's a ministry of mercy. And our mercy comes from our relationship with God, which leads me to our third priority, which is faithfulness. Faithfulness in our passage means living by faith. The original Greek in this verse really emphasizes the faith part of the faithfulness. Sometimes faithfulness needs other things. This here means basically faith, and some Bibles just translate it as straight up faith, and that's a really good translation. Just faith. And faith is about respecting invisible things. And faith is so important because the most important things in life are invisible. God is invisible. Love is invisible. The past and the future are invisible. Promises are invisible. Heaven is invisible. So all these things need to be known by faith. And faithful people are those who know how to prioritize invisible things, sometimes even over the things that they can see right in front of them. Faith changes our attitude towards everything in our life. Every day, faith tells us to do our best for people because our actions matter to God and they impact eternity. Faith shapes our commitments and our dreams. It's meant to shape our love life, our career choices, everything. And so let's always remember faith and mercy and justice. These are the first priorities for a Christian. If you know how to get these three things right, you will never be far off in your relationship with God. But on the other hand, if you get these things wrong, then you might as well get everything else wrong too, because it doesn't actually matter anymore. And so maybe today you can take a moment to ask, what can you do differently so that you can join God's work as He does mercy and justice through people like you? And what can you adjust in your life so that it'll make more sense when you think about God and heaven and eternity? Maybe you can talk over these ideas with another Christian that you respect. Because if we can get these big things right, we're setting ourselves up for a great future. And that said, life is not all about the big things, but we also have to move on to the small things as well, which is my second point. We have to move on to the small things. Read a story about a crowd of people. They went to a high school gym, and it was a high school in the States, and all these people were Americans. And they had all gone there for a wrestling match. They'd gone there to watch it, that is. And Americans, they tend to be pretty patriotic, and so they have this practice that before a game or before a match, they'll sing the national anthem, and they like to face the flag while they sing the anthem. Except that day, there was no flag in the gym. And so they looked and looked around, and finally they saw this guy with a flag on his pants. And so they said, okay, well, this guy's standing up at the top of the bleachers, and they all faced him, and they put their hands on their heart, and they sang to his sweatpants. And this thing became a viral meme, because I think it captures the same feeling that a lot of people share, because when a person loves their country, a flag is a flag. Doesn't matter if it's just printed on a pair of sweatpants. But on the other hand, we really would hope for better than this next time. You could say, they got the big thing right, but the small things matter too. And that's what Jesus was getting at in our passage. Let's read again. Jesus says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat but swallow a camel." So Jesus was talking about something they did that was really small. So it's a small thing to snip off a tenth of a potted plant. That's really small. But Jesus doesn't say don't do it. And Jesus doesn't say it doesn't matter. But rather, he says you should have practiced the big things, justice, mercy, and faithfulness, and have done the other things too, the little things, because the small things do matter. And Jesus went on to give the analogy of two animals, a gnat and a camel, and it helps to know that both animals were considered unclean. Like you might have heard that Jewish people don't eat pigs. Well, they don't eat gnats and camels for the same reason. It's because God made a rule, and those animals are out of bounds. And so in that sense, a gnat and a camel are the same. They're both out of bounds. But of course, a gnat and a camel are two different animals, and that's one is huge and one is tiny. The camel was the biggest animal in that area, and the gnat was the smallest animal. And Jesus was saying that's what it's like with the big sins and the small sins. You know, failing justice and mercy and faithfulness, that's like a camel-sized mistake. But failing to tithe for them was like a gnat-sized mistake. And it still mattered. It still affected their relationship with God. Because God cares about the small things too. I'm reminded of a friend of mine, or actually an old pastor. Before he was a pastor, he used to work at a grocery store, and he used to be the guy bagging the groceries. And so sometimes he would get these really grumpy and rude customers, and they'd give him a hard time, and so he'd try to get back at them. So sometimes these customers would be buying tomatoes, so as he was putting these tomatoes in their bag, you'd make sure to give them a nice hard squeeze as he put them in the bag. Which was probably not the best act of citizenship there. But it's not the worst thing that a person could do. But I think looking objectively, it is a missed opportunity. You know, it's a missed opportunity to build character, to show love that despite even it not being returned, it's a good thing. It's a chance to love God and worship Him. So it's a missed opportunity. See, once we get the big things in order, the big priorities, we'll see that the little things like that matter too. And we'll start noticing when we have bad habits that need polishing. For me, I spend too much time on gaming. I love computer games, but it gets to like this really unhealthy part where like I want to beat the other guy and crush his army into oblivion in all these different ways. It's not really healthy. It's taking away time from my family. Like it's making me more time stressed, and as a result, I'm more grumpy than I should be. Like I'm not able to hang out with people because I'm too busy gaming. I'm not exercising because I'm gaming. And so this is a small, I've definitely done worse. It's a small thing that leads to bigger things, that affects bigger things. And I think that's how it works with a lot of us. Our small habits affect bigger habits. And so let's make a point to polish our habits. Maybe we need to work on our friendships or our finances. Maybe we need to work on our imaginations or our skills development. But let's make it our everyday sacrifice to God to keep getting better at our mission, keep growing in the little things. And I expect to keep on growing, pay attention to the details. I expect God will change us, and He'll use us for great things. He'll make our effort worth it. I'll conclude by summarizing everything I've said, and then I'll pray for us. So, our big question today is, how can we set healthy priorities? And the answer is, we need to start with the big things and move on to the small things. So the big things are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. Justice means looking out for the little guy. Mercy means having the heart to help people in need. Faithfulness means respecting invisible things. And once we get these big, important priorities right, we move on to the small things, and we make a habit to improve always in these small things. Because we find that every day we have a small chance to grow. And if we keep growing, we can expect God to take us places and do great things with us. And the end result of all our efforts will be joy. Let's pray to close. God, we have sinned. We have neglected justice and mercy and faithfulness. And we've missed the small opportunities also that you've given us to do beautiful things each day. But you have forgiven us, and we're grateful for that. We thank you. But help us to follow you in big ways and small ways for your glory and for our joy. Amen.